Welcome to the Viewpoint. I am Mamadou Mboj. After 2 years of investigations into the financial dealings of former President Yahya Jammeh, the Jammeh Commission submitted in March this year its 1,600-page report to the government. And on Friday, 13th September, the government released its 93-page white paper on the report, which has generated much commentary on social media. Today on the Viewpoint, we will explore some of the talking points. And by the time this program airs on Thursday evening, President Barrow will have delivered his State of the Nation address to the National Assembly. But really, what is the state of the nation? And when we voted them into power, the coalition that is, in 2016, well, did we think that 3 years later we'll be where we are today? So to help me unpack some of the issues in this and explore some of the talking points is Mr. Jeggan Johnson. He's the Advocacy and Communications Officer in the Africa Governance Monitoring and Advocacy Project at the Open Society Foundation. Welcome to the Viewpoint, Mr. Gray Johnson.
Thank you, Modi.
Yes, so here I suppose, 93-page white paper, but the original report was 1,600 pages. So one might wonder, what has been left out? How do we truly evaluate the 93-page white paper?
Yes, I think that's a good question. But I think also in trying to apply our minds to this, let's not looking at the volume between the 1,600 and the under 100-page white paper. But I think we are in a strange situation here. What has happened is, yes, millions of dollars were actually expended in bringing about the Jammeh Commission, by virtue of the fact that the lead counsel had to be paid and her team, the commission itself, the commissioners, the support staff, etc. So it was a huge resource envelope. As you said rightly, it took almost 24 months before we got to where we were. Tremendous testimonies across the board, wide and very deep, and shocking as well. I don't think it surprised very many people, but I think it shocked a lot of people that the people that aided and abetted the massive looting and something like I'd like to call the state capture project of Yahya Jammeh was actually aided and abetted by individuals that were, very knowledgeable, individuals that were occupying public office and also public trust at the time. And I think this Jammeh report, the expectation certainly was the fact that we were going through a new phase, a new era, post-Jammeh, post a dictatorial regime, to a point where the government had actually now put its money where its mouth is to actually say that we are going to elevate the principles of transparency and accountability in this country. And we are going to further the quest for the demand for public accountability. So there was a lot of trust in this whole process. But as I said, we are now in a strange situation. We've reached a milestone, which is good that the process has been concluded, but it's not finished. And I say that because it's going to trigger another set of processes. Precisely because, as we sit here today, we have a report, 1,600 pages, we are told, that was handed over almost 6 months ago to the president, which is now supposedly has been, and I say supposedly, has been made public. I haven't seen it. I saw a pile of paper. As far as I'm concerned, it could have been blank A4 paper, but it was there. They showed us that this is what it was.
And you had put in the effort, you had actually gone.
Put the effort to try and find out, but no one can get you the physical paper. But in the 21st century, as we've seen in the past, government has never had any problems reaching out and communicating to the public, specifically the media, through press releases, attachments, etc. And the question now being asked is, why haven't they released the soft copy of the report itself? And they are actually obliged and obligated to ensure that not only is the report released, but the report is accessible. If the report if it's inaccessible, it means that they have actually breached a certain portion of that responsibility that they had. It is not enough to show me the voluminous documentation and I can't access it to apply my mind to it. So as it stands now, Modu, we are in a position where we have a narrative that's been monologued into the public space, which is Gambia government's version. We have not been accorded that same level of accessibility on the side of the Jana Commission's report. That's where the problem is.
Yes, perhaps a government spokesman might say that they're just being tardy in making it accessible, sooner or later they will come, we'll see how that one unfolds. Okay. But regarding the white paper itself, yes, for all it is worth, yes, what do you make of it?
Well, the white paper, as I said, it was only released about 4 days ago now, Friday, I believe the 13th of September. And it's already beginning to garner a lot of attention, a lot of criticism in some instances, and has actually drawn some incredulous minds asking questions as to the possible inconsistencies that actually exists in the white paper. Amongst the very many things which could be good, I think, the fact that they agreed with most of the findings of the commission, where there's a divergence between the Jana Commission's findings and the application of those findings and the disagreements that have actually come out of that between the Gambia government and the Jana Commission, I think is going to gather a lot of debate. One of which has bubbled to the surface is the issue of the exemptions.
The government had the discretion,
yes, really,
to either to accept
or to
reject.
Absolutely.
So surely that is their right, if one can call it that.
Yeah, but again, you cannot accept and reject and not justify the rejection. Because at the end of the day, it is not necessarily up to the government alone to determine what is wrongdoing, where the law has been broken, and where the service rules, there have been infractions on that, and there's questionable ethical behavior. That is not a judgment call. That is based on facts, and in some cases is based on law. So as a result, the question now arises, if the government says, because it's our right, we have now decided to disagree with it needs to be consistent with these four things that I talked about. If there's any consistency along the line, then obviously the public has the right to question it.
The selective justice, I think that's what some people actually have been referring to it on social media, the selective justice. Why exempt some and others you impose, you carry out the recommendation of the commission. So one wonders what criteria they use to do these assessments, these decisions.
Well, I mean, I'd like to shy away from the term selective justice because we haven't gotten there yet. But I think favoritism would be one. And obviously, people have got the right and also, have actually even got an obligation to ask these questions, especially in a democratic dispensation. And also for the sake of attaining closure and some form of justice in this whole exercise, which I think has been painful for a great deal of people involved either directly or indirectly, and also for the population in particular.
But again, you see our problem in many ways, because most of these things, they take political judgment in the end. But again, what do we have? We have a president who is so inexperienced, and we've all been talking about the damage that Yahya Jammeh had done, all public institutions. I mean, you just can't come and sack all. So we are really in some trouble, because we've been seeing this actually since he took over power. We've been complaining about most of his decisions. But this is where our problem is, that lack of political judgment in many ways at the very heart of government. Some might even call it incompetence. What do you say to that? Because there's a general pattern here in many ways, their response to the report. Yes.
And I wrote about this, in fact, 48 hours before the report was actually submitted. This was in March. where I had said that the old president's men are the new president's men.
And
we're beginning to see that. I was hoping, to be very honest with you, that President Barrow would have proven me wrong, because in that particular article I mentioned two specific individuals. Well, there were others, but two specific individuals that I had said that whilst this Jana Commission was ongoing, there are certain individuals that cannot be occupying positions of power within the corridors of influence. And as a result, it goes against the ethics of public service. It's illegal, what they did. It's aiding and abetting. It is very clear. And also they've admitted that they were part of this. So whilst these investigations were ongoing and the commission was ongoing, I think it would have been prudent for the president to have actually instituted some kind of a process. And it's not a dismissal, because they haven't proven guilty of anything yet, but just to say, step away, stay at home, you'll be on suspension until this matter is clear. Because it wasn't the commission, let's not get it wrong. The commission was an investigative body. That is it. It was actually it was actually at the time, whilst it was sitting, the legitimate anti-corruption commission, because that's what it was. We don't have one. So that was constituted. So whilst these investigations are ongoing, and I've worked with lots of anti-corruption commissions around the African continent. I've overseen reports in no less than, I think, 26 countries or thereabout. And it is clear that whilst these investigations are ongoing, the individuals, if you're in the public service, are asked to step aside. One, not to interfere with the investigations in any way, shape or form. And then secondly, just in order not to taint the picture, and also in order not to send the wrong signal or a perception problem, that on the one side, people that have been fingered with probable cause that they might have been engaged in wrongdoing are still occupying the highest offices. So,
but it seems that we've taken a slightly different path. We've also seen at the TRRC that some of those people adversely mentioned, because we can use similar terms here, some of those people adversely mentioned who are still serving in government, continue to serve in government. So don't you see, you've seen this, you've witnessed, or at least know about many other transitional societies. We are in this transitional period. Don't you see that we might have to make certain compromises because of the very nature of this transitional process that we have taken? What do you think?
There are certain things that can't be compromised. That is one thing. We cannot possibly compromise a situation where, and in the case of the TRRC, where people have committed and have admitted, it's not even an accusation, it's an admittance, in full public view, that they took part in horrendous activities that are crimes against humanity, including torture, and the ultimate crime, which is murder. Not only one murder, but multiple murders. Yes. I call some of these guys serial killers. And they've admitted it. It's not me saying that.
And we are told that they admitted on the understanding, perhaps not made explicitly clear, or perhaps made explicitly clear, but we didn't know about it, that, there will be some, not exactly amnesty as such, but again, they will allow them.
Again, this is the problem that I'm having with the process.
Yes.
And that's with every exercise. And as you said, there's a systematic pattern here. So the TRRC, the process hasn't concluded. Because remember, is the truth, reparations, right?
Yes, truth,
reconciliations, reparations, right?
Yes.
So out of all of that, there must be a reparations committee, I will assume, or a subcommittee. There must be an issue around amnesty as well, right? And a subcommittee that has to. We haven't gotten there because the full testimonies, not all of them have come in. That's the first thing. Secondly, the process of the TRRC is far from being complete. So for now deals to be struck, supposedly, by certain individuals that have absolutely, and it could be challenged, what authority do they have to be able to do this? Now, going back to the issue of still letting people occupy certain public positions or whatnot, either which way, if you've been fingered in gross human rights abuses or any sort of abuse whatsoever, the most logical thing to have happened would be you need to step aside until your name is cleared. If your name hasn't been cleared, then you'll deal with the consequences. If you've been cleared in the process, you can come back to work. That hasn't happened at all anyway.
Except for whenever you have the human cry from people, then you would have the reactive.
It's reactive, but it's not consistent.
It's not consistent.
Because there's some individuals that will either be arrested or be and other individuals that have committed the same crime, by the way, supposedly, allegedly the same, admitted to committing the same crime.
But apparently, the difference is those who cooperate. And for instance, the Omar Jallos and the rest, the Malik Jattas, and those who do not cooperate, Yankuba Toure. So you will have different outcomes meted out to each group.
The issues of the cooperating and not cooperating. Cooperating is a good thing, but cooperating is not a privilege, right? No one should pat you on the back after admitting to murder to say, well, you've killed the 54 migrants, out of which the 44 Ghanaians and 15 or 20 other Gambians, innocent civilians, A, B, C, D, and E. But since you've been so good in admitting that you did the killing, it's okay. We'll show you some lenience. You can't do that. That has never happened anyway.
Yes,
now,
but
I'm not saying,
in an ideal situation,
now, yes,
that shouldn't happen.
That shouldn't happen.
Again, when we take the nasty brutality of life, the reality, the brute reality of life, sometimes one may need to do certain compromises, especially in the state we are in.
But what I'm saying is, why are we compromising when the process is not complete? So there are certain practices which are normal practices. If you found wanting and you've done certain things, there are options. There are options within reasonable grounds to say, okay, you will step aside until A, B, and C has been completed, and then we will decide what we're going to do, and then you can come back in. Or in some cases, you could say, well, you've admitted to doing A, B, C, D, and E, and at this point in time, we are going to use whatever legal channels that we to deal with you. Or we can say that at the end of the day, as far as we're concerned, you did this whilst you were in the military, ABC, and let them deal with military justice and see what. There are options. That's the point I'm trying to make. Exactly.
And it seems,
but they've used the easiest option, which is also the most controversial option, which is also an option which is conclusive in my mind, because they have basically decided to make the decision through the deal that they supposedly make. I wasn't privy, I wasn't there, but if it's true that they had given the impression to these admitted killers in the case of the TRRC, right, to say, okay, come before the TRRC, tell the truth, and we're going to show you leniency. My point that I'm making is it's too premature to be making such promises because the TRRC hasn't finished its job.
Absolutely. It seems that they are making it up in some instances.
They're making it up as they go along. Which brings me back again to the Jeggan Commission. And I know this is likely going to be maybe a controversial statement, and it's going to be very short. As you said, they're making it up as they go along.
Well, it seems.
So no, but that's what there's a pattern. And the question now is, remember, when the commission started its work, at some point in time, halfway through, I believe it was, or maybe 3/4 of the way through, they had decided now they were going to start seizing properties of Jammeh and freezing and doing whatever. Some would argue to say that that could have been a little bit premature because there was a conclusion that was made. Before the Jeggan, remember, the Jeggan Commission was the first, and as I said, anti-corruption, even if it's temporary, platform that was looking at elevating the demand for public accountability. If we are going to set up processes, let us respect the rules of these processes. Let us be systematic about it. Let's not be in a haste or in a hurry. And let it be done in the true spirit of transparency. Let it be open. And now we're coming back to a point where the first major milestone has been crossed, whereby we've had a first commission. And we are still talking about accessing reports, not being able to access reports, and causing a great deal of public speculation, which is not necessary. Why are we at this particular stage seemingly playing a cat and mouse game between the government and the public?
That's it. And then one wonders, what do you attribute it to? Is it incompetence? Is it skullduggery, or a combination of both? What do you think is
It's
going
a combination
on here?
of both.
Because recently we've seen the report, the Transparency International report, the US State Department's report, and we've been categorized as one of the least transparent countries, at least within the group surveyed. That's really very worrying.
It is worrying, especially given the fact that we are talking about a new Gambia, whatever that means now. And also the expectations of the people when they voted in this new dispensation, this new administration, was that the cornerstone of our trajectory after 22 years of dictatorship, which is obviously has all the characteristics of secrecy, has all the characteristics of misinformation, has all the characteristics of contradictions.
We'll go on a short break. Stay put.
waaye déedéet waay ay warula naaj waaye xam naa ne bu paree rek ma kontaan.
sama secret mooy ami tamaate jeeg balaa jonge day mun waañam ami tamaate soo ko defee si sa tooga da koy xonqal cuur jeeg bu koy jëfandikoo sa jëkkër du la musa mere.
nijaay
waaw
baala ma tey dama naa gis añ bi
ay séeri ko xiif naa de.
waaye léegi ma pare topp suma lii di maa ngi dem yegg kaay topp ma waaw topp suma gannaaw
loolu de laa bëgg a dégg.
Faro compagnie mi ñu indil bébé Mariam moo ñu indil ami tamaate.
ay séeri sa benn cin xonq na.
ami tamaate de moo si jaar
ami tamaate.
waaw waaw ami tamaate
moo ko xonqal nii.
nii rek
cëm.
waaw
bis ni ki tey.
waaw
dee naa la ami tamaate.
kontaan naa
doomi ndey ami tamaate bi nag léegi ku ko bëgg nag mooy def nag nga koy am bépp marché boo dugga bitik supermarket table yi bépp foo dugga si biir réew mi di nga am ami tamaate.
Welcome back again to the Viewpoint. Mr. Gray Johnson, of course, 3 years ago, we were told they campaigned on it. In fact, I've heard Khalifa Saleh say that if they didn't have that clause of the 3 years, possibly they wouldn't have been able to form the coalition. So significant a plank it was within the whole scheme of things. But right now they're trying to downplay it. Of course, we're talking about the state we're in. What we expected from 2016, they said by 2019. Of course, President Barrow should have been on his way out, but we haven't seen that.
Yes, what they communicated is, and another thing. This 3 years, the mandate that they agreed on, we should not look at it in isolation, because that was a promise. Not only did they make to themselves, but they made to us, and that's the most important thing. Now, I'm not sure whether the public's main motivation was the fact that after 3 years we'll go to elections. That'll be very hard for me to make a call on that. But what I can say is that the 3-year issue should have been, if that's what Khalifa said, and I'm sure he did, because I know that you are very accurate in some of your observations. If that's the case, then that should have been of the highest priority, because that would have been the sunset clause, right? To say that we have 3 years, one, to do all the fundamental reforms that we need to do, but then more importantly, we have to prepare ourselves to go to elections in 3 years. It is clear to me, and all indications show that that wasn't a priority. It wasn't a priority for the coalition. Why wasn't it a priority for the coalition? Because they never discussed the issue of the 3 years seriously until they fell apart.
But this is the thing, wasn't it? It seems as if they had not really worked out the details. We just wanted to get rid of Yahya Jammeh, so we came up with all sorts of ideas, to glue us together to form a coalition, a bit like Brexit really. But once the reality came, that was it. Had no idea about anything, because really once they came into power, that 3-year thing should have been put on a constitutional footing, perhaps an amendment, as they did certain amendments when they first came in.
That was one thing that they could have done. Secondly, also, what they could have done quite clearly also was to have, again, it's the preparation. Because, and now and I'm going to say this very clearly and categorically, it is foolhardy for anybody today, as actually it was foolhardy for anybody from June, to think that we're going to now get into a situation where President Barrow is going to step down at the end of December.
Well, he has said it categorically, he said he wouldn't.
Yeah, and then the reason why I would say, why should he? That's the first thing. The second thing is, what is the objective of him stepping down? Does it, because we're not going to elections, we know that. So the question then is, what is the point? What is the objective of these individuals that are now, they didn't start before. They started after a certain political outcome had actually occurred, which is that the fact is, President Barrow fell out with almost every single member of the coalition. That's the first thing, through the first reshuffle. Then he fell out with the largest partner of the coalition, Usainu Darboe, the UDP. When that happened, a few months down the line, we started hearing the whispers and the drumbeats of the issue of cutting down the term of the president. So it is a politically driven and motivated exercise. I think it is not based on anything that is realistic nor genuine, let alone legal.
And the dangers in it, because it seems we might sleepwalk ourselves into some kind of trouble in December. We already I've heard, sort of anecdotally, some people who work within the tourist industry, they're scared that perhaps there might be travel advisories for them not to come, or I've even had people calling me from England and say, is it safe for me to come? So it can be quite dangerous. We have to scotch.
It's true, but I think the danger is not necessarily, and the uncertainty is not necessarily about the 3 years. And I'll say that categorically. The 3 years is one of the many issues that people have. The major issue that people are facing now is the disillusionment, the level of disappointment, the level of dashed expectations. The 3 years is just one factor.
So we call it the coalition of the disgruntled.
That's what it is.
And people
are latching onto that, as a linchpin. But there's so many other things that have happened along the way. So it's not necessarily about the low visibility that perhaps people in the private sector, in this case you talked about the tourism that they have, it's about the sense of also uncertainty. To say, okay, for example, what is going to be the outcome now of the Jeggan Commission report? We don't know. I can guarantee you that they're going to be court cases. That's a fact.
Oh yes, that's their right. They can go to the court of
appeal.
Of course,
and that's happening already. Why is it happening? And this is, again, I'm talking about the process. Some people were privy to the information of the Jeggan Commission report, and some people were not. And so the ones that were privy, that were fingered in this whole thing, decided that to be forewarned is to be forearmed, and decided they were going to take the matter to the court. That is happening. So there's uncertainty. Because of this uncertainty, people are now extremely, and the way they've handled the outcome, or the first phase of the outcome of this particular report, people are now suspicious and are extremely nervous about how they will handle, in my opinion, probably the two most important exercises that will determine the stability of this country: the TRRC and the Constitutional Review Commission.
You are a policy analyst. Now, if you were to go and advise President Barrow, we've just been cataloguing here, we haven't really gone into it, but we've just been listing here some of the deficiencies, some of the problems with this country right now. You were a policy analyst. If you were advising Barrow, where would you begin?
I'll begin at the most obvious and the easiest part. Get yourself a new team. Period. It is absolutely clear that the people that are surrounding you are not only highly incompetent, they are incapable of being able to marshal a strategy and a plan to get us out of the situation that we're in. Because this is not a normal situation in this country. We've got a lot of challenges. We did not come out of a handing over of power between one incumbent to another candidate that was freely elected, fairly. We went through an impasse. We went through 2 decades of tremendous hardship. And as a result, we needed a transformational president who had a transformational team. That means you have to have vision. It means you have to have experience. It means, because of the fact that we're also dealing with issues of public trust, you have to have people that are not tainted. So there's no perception, of possible wrongdoing. There had to be trust. We had to build public trust. We haven't done any of those three precisely because the same people that have been implicated in wrongdoing are the ones that are surrounding the president.
Absolutely. But
that's a problem.
That is a big problem. But look at it. It was a bit like when Jammeh came into office, really, he was using Jawara's people. So now we've all said how tainted the whole system is in many ways. For 22 years, is there anybody who is not tainted? I mean, where do I find these people who are all tainted with the integrity and all the rest of it? When, for instance, when we think about people like Jeggan Senghor, eminently qualified, he's working, the Open Foundation is in South Africa, isn't he? He's working out there.
No, it's true.
So many people are out there. So where is he going to find the team, the competence and experience and all the rest of it to help him?
I think within the first 100 days, and that's what I always say, that's what sets the tone. And for me, I was one of the first people to get up after the 100 days to say we have problems. And I was criticized because I was told that I'm not giving Barrow enough time and that Barrow is not a politician, he's learning on the job. That is true, he's not a politician, but we cannot afford to have a head of state learning on the job. As a result, he needs to surround himself with people that know the job to be able to help him moving forward. He didn't do any of that. That's the first thing. We know that. And it's obvious. That is why. Otherwise, we wouldn't be where we are. So I'm not making that up. It's a fact. The issue about the pool of people that he can tap from. It's true. Gambia is a small country. It's 2 million of us. But if you look at the database of Gambians abroad, and even here, the things that they are doing outside, in other countries, for other organizations, and what they've done, and some of them have come back home and retired. As I said, this was a transitional period. It's not permanent. And I think within the first 100 days, if he had gone out and restarted, and you don't need a lot of people. You need maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 people. It's a small country that know what they're doing, that have got the credibility, they've got the experience, they can basically draw on and sustain the international goodwill that we had. Because that's what that's gone, we know that, right? To be able to basically help you craft a vision, deliver on that vision, and move it forward. That was possible in the first 100 days. Today, it becomes very difficult for Barrow to be able to go out and find the creme de la creme, the credible people, because also a credible person wants to be part of a credible team. If the team is not credible, if it's not a winning team, just like anything else in football, it makes it difficult if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the possibility, if you don't have the depth and the possibility of being a winning team. It's difficult to go and find the creme de la creme and the best of the best. That's just the reality, and that's where we are now. The current administration is suffering from a credibility problem, and it's going to be extremely difficult to be able to get credible people.
Absolutely. When we read, we've all been talking about the shortcomings, yet when we read the surveys from Afrobarometer, I wonder what can one attribute the fact that about, 67% of Gambians has got an approval rating of 67%. What do you make? What do you make of that? Quite interesting in itself.
As I said, again, it's about dashed expectations. This is where we are. People are, and again, I don't want to sound negative. I'm just being realistic. I think, the honeymoon period had passed a long time ago. Now we are in a period of possible self-doubt. The reality hasn't set in yet, because I think there is still an opportunity to be able to, one, change course. Especially through these processes that we've decided to undertake. There's an opportunity to clearly demonstrate that we are serious about the CRC by at least making it public through legal action, enactments and whatever, to actually give us a time frame now to say that there will be a referendum. We don't know that. We are assuming that because the CRC is doing its work, there's going to be a referendum. There's no guarantee there's going to be a referendum. That's one. Two, it'll also be good for this government to be able to, without any ambiguity, make the effort to be a lot more transparent rather than being selective. You can't have selective transparency. You can't come in front of the press when it suits you, and when you are under a barrage of pressure, disappear for 6 months and nobody hears from you. Mm-hmm. Especially given the fact that you've got 3 press officers, not 1, 3. And so as a result, and people are not stupid. That's the other thing I wanted to make it very clear. We may have a high illiteracy rate. It doesn't mean that we have stupid people in this country. People are extremely clever. They are extremely smart. You cannot fool them. And you can't assume that because they're illiterate, you can use big words, the law and jargon to be able to at least try and justify a position that is unjustifiable. Sometimes
we even hear them say that it was God who put him there. We all know that they're using that populist card, and often one wonders, was he elected or ordained? Not really sure what they're trying to say. Exactly. But into the sense that perhaps there's a distraction. It's like they're jockeying for power, really, between Barrow, mainly particularly Barrow and the UDP. So they've been distracted by that. So the imperatives of the nation, really, they're all looking at it with a blurred vision in many ways. And putting that, how do you see the other political parties?
I think at this point we are in a very sad situation. Sad situation in the fact that the country is leaderless. That's the truth. In all aspects. The faith-based organizations, there's not a person that you can basically lean on and come to say, okay, this is a person that will speak truth to power, which is a problem. The traditional authorities, there's no leadership there. They're highly tainted and it's highly politicized. It's the same thing that Jammeh did. We are still sovereign. There's been no change. The political parties, we are leaderless. I have yet to hear, maybe aside from Halifa, but there's been some consistency issues there. But, and I'll be fair with Halifa, he's come out when the youth were protesting, whatever. He was the only one that came. Nobody else came out. I am yet to hear political party heads make sound pronouncements on policy matters. I'm yet to hear political leaders come out on in a timely basis to basically call out the government when they are wrong and they've done certain things that they shouldn't have done. I am yet to hear this diplomatic scandal. Not a single political party head has come out to talk about anything sound about the matter. We also have the lack of leadership in the second arm of government, which is the National Assembly. I don't know for the life of me as to why the Committee on Foreign Affairs has not hauled the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Interior, and even the Minister of Justice to the committee to say, explain to us what happened with these diplomatic passports and why have things gone wrong. What are we going to do to start the investigation? There has to be an inquiry. That hasn't happened. And finally, again at the National Assembly level, when we had pushed for the SEMLEX investigations to actually start that particular procedure, the president decided that he was living on a completely different planet and he had a different plan. Whilst the National Assembly had started their inquiry, the president used his authority, right, as illegal as it was, to award the contract to SEMLEX when SEMLEX was being investigated, and he said an inquiry is an investigation, was supposedly being investigated by the National Assembly. To this day, I am not aware whether that inquiry has closed.
Well, didn't they
because
say that?
It cannot be in abeyance.
But didn't they say that there was an existing valid contract and Gambia government couldn't just...
But what I'm saying is the National Assembly had instituted an inquiry. They started it. To my mind, I could be wrong, and I've been following this quite closely. They haven't closed the investigation. You can't open something and just keep going.
So it's just in abeyance?
Yes. They've opened an investigation into SEMLEX. The president has decided to award the contract to SEMLEX using executive decision. It wasn't based on anything, because the contract that they were talking about that they couldn't get out of, that's not true. In fact, what had happened was they signed a new contract in July with Barrow. So it has nothing to do with that old contract. They signed a new contract and they tried to keep it a secret. This is why I'm saying we have now this level of the lack of transparency and everything is being done in secret. So coming back to the point, there's a lack of leadership in the National Assembly as well. And so we are in this situation now where people are really looking for where to turn. Who do we go to? Who's going to be our father? Who's going to be our mother? Who's going to be our guardian in times of crisis? We are in crisis, by the way. This country is in a crisis because we are in a political crisis. There is no love lost between Barrow and the opposition political, well, I wouldn't say opposition, the coalition. We are in a crisis because we have a president that doesn't have a party yet. We are in a crisis because there's some confusion amongst the populace whether Barrow should leave after 3 years or whether he should stay on. We are in a crisis because the political rhetoric has gotten toxic, and there is no leadership from the political parties, one, to tell their constituents the truth and the realities around the fact that it is cost prohibitive, it is legally prohibitive, it is operationally prohibitive to have a president step down in December. They haven't done that. They're keeping quiet for their own advantage and hoping that eventually there'll be some kind of a social movement and some kind of a protest to get this man out. That is irresponsible.
That's it. But then it is in times of crisis that really leadership will emerge.
Usually.
It is fertile
But we haven't seen that. And it's been going on. It's been in abeyance for too long. And I'm worried about this. I'm worried about this because this country is looking for guidance. This country is looking for decisive, fair, transparent, and smart leadership. We're not getting that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jeggan Gray Johnson. I think I remember when Yahya Jammeh took over, you had a poem, you wrote a poem, I think it was in Foroya, and I can remember this line, who is going to save us from our saviors? I think we have sort of reached that stage again. Thank you very much for joining us on the Viewpoint today. And thank you very much, viewers, for joining us on the Viewpoint. Until the next time, goodbye. I'm Momodu Boch.